Our heart's desire. When we have a sincere desire to do something special to build the church, God's temple, we should be encouraged that the Lord will value our desire. Here's Gene to explain.
You know, that's a very, very important principle. It's a very encouraging principle. In fact, I've used the word encourage right within that principle, because it is indeed a very encouraging principle, and that is that the Lord will actually value our desire even though we don't carry it out for one reason or another. We see this illustrated in the life of King David. David had a very sincere desire to build the temple in Jerusalem. That was his heart's desire. Now, one of the reasons that really created that desire, he'd build his own temple, his own palace. And he really didn't feel very good about it. It was a beautiful palace. But he didn't feel good about it. I think he felt a bit guilty. But I think also, even in spite of perhaps his guilt, he had a sincere desire to build God's temple. So we read about this in 1 Chronicles, going back now into 1 Chronicles, chapter 17, verses 1 and 2. Here is the record. When David had settled into his palace, and as I said, it's a very beautiful palace. It was well built with gold and silver and all that would be involved in a palace of that day. But we read, when David had settled into his palace, he said to Nathan the prophet, very familiar name in David's life, Nathan the prophet, a godly man. And he said to Nathan the prophet, look, I'm living in a cedar house, while the ark of the Lord's covenant is under tent curtains. In other words, he's saying, how in the world can I continue to live in this beautiful, beautiful palace, and even the ark of the Lord and the presence of God through that ark is under a tent? And notice Nathan's response. So Nathan told David, do all that is on your heart, for God is with you. Now Nathan didn't know at that moment, you see, that it wasn't the will of God. But Nathan did recognize that the desire was good. It was a good desire. It was a proper desire. And later, of course, the Lord told Nathan that it wasn't the will. He told David. God actually revealed himself to David and said, no, it's not my will that you build the temple. It's the will, my will, that Solomon, your son, builds it. And so here in 2 Chronicles, Solomon is reviewing that. And notice what he says in 2 Chronicles chapter 6. Now it was in the heart of my father David to build a temple for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. Again, notice the emphasis on heart. Heart. David's heart. And it was a pure motive. It was in the heart of my father to do this. However, he goes on to say, Yahweh said to my father David, since it was your desire to build a temple for my name, you have done well to have this desire. In other words, God is saying through Solomon, and interpreting that event, that when David, his father, had that desire, even though it wasn't the will of God for him to fulfill that desire, it was good. It was a proper desire. And God was going to honor that desire. And so Solomon goes on to say, yet you are not the one, reflecting on the conversation that God had with David, yet you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own offspring, will build the temple for my name. In other words, Solomon's reviewing exactly what God had said to his father. The right desire, God honored the desire, and yet he wasn't going to fulfill that desire to build that temple. That's a wonderful, encouraging principle, because I think all of us have certain desires that are in the will of God. They're not opposed to the will of God, and yet we'll never probably be the one to fulfill that desire. And that was true in David's life, and yet God honored that. You know, when you look into the New Testament, we see this illustrated in Paul's life, in the life of his fellow missionaries. When he wrote to the Thessalonians in chapter 2, verse 17 and 18, notice what he says. But as for us, brothers, sisters, after we were forced to leave you for a short time, in person, not in heart, we greatly desired and made every effort to return and see you face to face. Now, what happened here is that Paul and Silas and Timothy as well had to leave Thessalonica, a church that they founded, because the persecution became so extreme they had to leave. But they always had a desire, Paul said. They had a desire to return. We had a desire to come back. We had a desire to come back to minister to you. And Paul said, we made every effort. We tried hard. We wanted to see you face to face. This is the great Apostle Paul writing. That was the desire of his heart. So he says, so we wanted to come to you, even I, Paul, time and again, but Satan hindered us. Now, again, kind of try to explain that. You know, here's the great Apostle Paul who has this desire. He wants to go back. He wants to minister to these people. And yet Satan interfered. Satan hindered them from carrying out that desire. It was a great desire. It was a desire that was in harmony with God's will. And yet, Paul never fulfilled that desire, as far as we know. Now, later, I think he did get back to the church, but at this moment, when he's referring to the fact they wanted to go back, Satan hindered them. I'm not sure how Satan hindered them. I'm not sure what the elements were in the environment and the situation, the spiritual dynamics. All I know is that Satan hindered them. But the fact is that Paul and his fellow missionaries had a great desire. When we go to the Corinthian letter, we see again an emphasis on the fact that God sees the heart, God sees the desire of our heart. And this is what Paul wrote to the Corinthians. Therefore, don't judge anything prematurely before the Lord comes, who will both bring to light what is hidden in darkness and reveal the intentions of the hearts. And then praise will come to each one from God. Incredible statement about the fact that, again, God sees the heart. And God will judge the intentions of the heart, the judgments of the heart, the intentions of the heart that are in harmony with His will, even though we're not able to carry out those intentions. So the question for reflection response is, though God honors unfulfilled sincere desires, as He did, of course, in the life of David, why should we be cautious not to make excuses for failing to take action to make these desires a reality? Well, again, I think we need to maintain a very careful balance. David would have indeed taken action. In other words, his heart was so pure in this that it was as if in God's sight he actually took action. And yet God said, that's not the plan I have for you. But because his heart was pure, God honored that desire in his life. And so I think we need to realize in our own lives that basically God will honor our desires if they're pure, even though we may not be able to carry them out. You know, I think about this and I think about, okay, here's a person who said, you know, I would love to give $1 million to build the kingdom. By the way, that's a great desire. I wish I could say that. I can't, but that's a great desire. But the fact of the matter is, here's a person who said, I'd love to give $1 million, but because he can't, he makes a statement, but because he can't, he doesn't do anything. Now, there's something wrong with that statement. There's something wrong with that statement. If a man says, this is what I want to do, but he doesn't do anything. Unfortunately, that happens. And I think we can apply that to a lot of things. If I could do this, or if I could do that, but since I can't, we don't do anything. Well, God certainly is not going to honor that desire. It's not based on a pure motive. But with David, it was a pure motive. And God honored it. And so here's the principle. When we have a sincere desire to do something special to build the church, God's temple, we should be encouraged that the Lord will value our desire. As I look at that principle, I think of my own life, and I think of where I am at the stage of life. And I can think of a lot of things I'd like to see happen. And I believe that, as far as I know my own heart, the motive is pure. But even as I was reviewing this material, I had to say, Lord, this is the desire of my heart. And I really believe that this desire is in harmony with your will. And yet, I realize that that may never come to fruition through me. And I had to say, Lord, that's okay. I'd like to be a part of that. It's my desire. In fact, it's in harmony with things that you say in your word. But Lord, it's in your hands. And you know, I believe that God will honor the desire of my heart, whether I accomplish it or whether I don't. At this moment, that's what I feel is a pure motive. And if it's not a pure motive, then I ask the Lord through His Word to penetrate deeply into my heart and reveal what is my true motive. God honors pure motives when our desires are in harmony with His will.